Yeah, so I think the whole idea, continuing from last year and next year, is to see that we continue with this theme as ecology is economy, to actually make out that without ecology, there is no resource, and without no resource, there cannot be an economy. If you look at it, actually more than, other than services industry, which also is dependent, more than 92% of every product and service, other than space offerings, are linked with ecology in some way or the other, oceans or this or that, or transportation, etc. So we thought that the framework should change. In fact, one of the books that we are hoping to launch in the next 2 years is called The Natural Wealth of Nations. You know, Adam Smith did Wealth of Nations. So we said, why don't we call it, what is the natural wealth of nations? And towards that, therefore, we created a context. And the context is, unless you value nature, unless you value anything, and the only context is, we are saying ecology for the time being, forget social dimensioning, is that unless you value nature, how can you actually preserve nature? So it's just part of the same coin. One side is economy, one side is ecology. You flip the coin. If you take away ecology, then you've got no economy. If you take away economy, there's no ecology. So why isn't it that people like yourselves, Vivek, at the helm of affairs in IFC, in the World Bank, are not saying that let us value nature. Let us not talk about ESG and SDGs and all that. Straight valuation of nature. Question is, how do you do it is a separate part. So why isn't it that you are not actually for any project saying, this is the value of nature, this is what we'll add, this is what we'll subtract. So that's question one. And then I'll move on to another two questions.
Sure. No, thanks so much, Ranjit, and thanks for having me. So I think you raise a very valid point, which we've been debating. I've been in this job now for 10 months, and we've been discussing it. And the challenge really is for us to say this. So we all agree that we need to start valuing nature. And we are looking at sort of early steps on how do we do that and linking it to carbon markets. Because when you value something, you have to have a basis on how do you get to that value. And it has to be something which is credible. It has to be, very importantly, the moment you start putting a value to anything, the financial institutions will have to say that we agree with the value or we disagree and this is what we want. And that's a pretty, you're really going down a fairly complicated path there. So one way that we think this will start happening, I think very quickly, is once carbon markets start to move, then, you have reforestation or afforestation, you get carbon credits for that. So that will immediately assign a value to that. Now, that doesn't then take away from the broader sort of perspective you're saying, a country that has natural assets, how do you include that? You can't include in the GDP of a country, but, for example, a country which is has a relatively low GDP, but has very rich mineral resources, it doesn't reflect anywhere in the balance sheet. And that is relatively easy to measure. And so that is what, so it's a complicated thing. And, it's sort of, I would say it's very secular because one thing leads to another. But I think the moment we can come up with a methodology on valuing nature, I think the financial markets will pick it up very quickly. And they're already talking about this. I mean, we are in discussions with people right now on how do they want to buy future carbon credits, for example. So that is automatically giving value to a reforestation project that we may be looking at in, say, Kenya or Jamaica. So I think baby steps, Ranjit, but I think we need to get it right, because like with anything else, if we move fast and we don't get it right, we may be set back by another 8 or 10 years.
No, I think that's a good answer. At least it's optimistic that there's discussion. I may not necessarily agree to the methodology. Recently there was a book launched by a person from Bangladesh origin, but English, called Partha Dasgupta from Cambridge. It's called it's called The Economics of Biodiversity. It's a series of books, and in fact, maybe I should just send it to you just after this call, the link. And it's a whole series of how actually we do biodiversity. Actually, also the point is, because people in the World Bank and IFC, who everybody looks up to, whether it's right or wrong or debatable, the point is we all do, and every country would love an endorsement by World Bank and IFC to say that we are a good country or we are a safe country to invest in. Is that why is the thinking there so linear? Because I'm saying, why should it be carbon markets? Let me take financial asset classes and talk the language that they talk. Say Arunachal and Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, you talk about GDP, you talk about industrial output, and therefore you have a value for Maharashtra. And therefore, if you take 100 square kilometers of Maharashtra, Bombay's real estate, you'll say, okay, these are flats, this is the value. Let's switch and look at Arunachal. There's 100 square kilometers of forest. There is no reason why that's not a financial asset class. And I'll give you 3 reasons to demonstrate that. If you look at it and just calculate the bamboos, and I just cut the bamboos and take it out and sell it at 300 rupees, there's a value to it. The teak, there's a value, and I can do a discounted cash flow over 50, 60 years on teak, or longer woods, But equally, I can divide it into 4 broad asset classes. The first asset class is the asset class of medicine and health. So we get food and fruits, which are medicine and health, whatever it be. Across the world, that is how it is used. Then we get what is called a life and lifestyle. Wood for furniture, wood for clothing, wood for whatever, which is with bamboo, with teak, etc. And then you have food, a food cluster. All the trees that are there. So in 100 square kilometers, there are 20 mango trees or 20 food, other trees which say, okay, this is the value, this is how it'll sort of give you output, and therefore there's a value. And the last is a more difficult one, which is more esoteric, but we'll come back to that, is a 4th vertical called the tourism asset vertical, where people come in to see actually what a forest is, etc., etc. So that is at one level, asset, pure basic asset of nature valuation. So this does not require carbon markets. Second valuation is, if I take the example of bamboo and drop it down and say, I can make an industry out of bamboo. What are the industries? Food, furniture, this entire process of making clothes from bamboo. As you know, you've been exposed to clothes from bamboo made from Thailand or China especially, which people are using now. The clothes and linen, etc., are fantastic. So that's a value. Each of the verticals that I told you of asset classes is a drop-down value. And you can talk about the value addition through industry. So that's the second. The first bucket is bare financial asset management of the Arunachal forest. Second is you take the Arunachal forest and convert it into industrial products, industrial making. So that's the second value on any way that you want to do it, which is the modern. The last is what people are talking about, which is what is the forest, how good is it for life and living, which is how much oxygen does it give, what water does it do, watershed management, soil, and carbon. So that will be the third. So if you look at these 3, the sum total of this is definitely more valuable than any other economic model. We don't need to actually go down the path of carbon. And we've done enough papers with that. And what Nick Stern went on to say in our documentation, and with Yale University, which we are doing in Ashoka University, by the way, is that what we are saying is that let us take this asset class of Arunachal and give it as a hypothecation to the bank, which we would do if it was a flat, right? The bank then gives us a loan against it for social mobility. That means for roads, for hospitals, for education, and for any other community living, which includes housing, fresh water, drinking, etc. So we borrow against that asset and give it, and we pay it back in time, either through the 3 verticals and the 3 drop-down macroeconomic financial asset classes that we create. Meaning, why can't that be considered?
Yeah, so Ranjit, 2 things. I think when I talked about carbon markets was more related to, there are 2 kinds of assets we're talking about. One is assets which will be put to a productive commercial use. So mango orchards or bamboo farms, or timber, where you're planting forests for timber or for wood. So those kind of things, I think that is happening today. I mean, you go and you can buy a farm because you're going to, when you harvest it, you are going to you will get cash from it, and there will be cash flow to repay the debt there. So that I think is happening. It may not be happening at the scale at which it's needed. What I was referring to more is when you were to do reforestation or afforestation, where you're not going to have a commercial productive use. And I'm using the word commercial, I'm just sort of making it up, where you're not going to you're really going to rely on the fact that this is a carbon sink and therefore it has value and therefore you get carbon credits. But this is not a forest that you would go and harvest for bamboo or for fruits or vegetables or things like that. So that's what I was, so what you're talking about, the former, I think, we've actually financed a deal, which I worked on many years ago in China, where this was a Scandinavian company. And I think, I forget the numbers, but they wanted to do 5,000 hectares of forest. And we financed it because the product that they were then getting out of there, they were processing it and selling it in the market. So there was a clear link between the cash that that asset is generating, which is like a machine or an apartment, like you said. You have an apartment, you can put it on rent. You have an apartment, you can sell it off to repay your loan. So I think when you can make a direct link in generating cash flow from that asset, those things will clearly have a value. Now, is the value right or wrong? I think that's debatable. That's the way at least that we look at it. But I would say that trend has already started. It's not happening. I agree with you on the scale that it should, but I wouldn't say that that's not happening. And there's a lot of work going on in the World Bank looking at, I would say, how do you monetize some of these assets today? So we are looking at a lot of things in that space right now.
No, but actually, Pat, just to correct it, that's one way. Again, you are putting on a lens of what I would call commercial farming to forestry. I'm not talking about that. If you take a wild forest of Arunachal, that is an asset class in itself, because actually you're doing nothing on it, but the community owns that forest and the community will defoil the forest as is required. For example, we are not talking about creating a monoculture of tea industry or mango or etc. No, absolutely. In fact, that is what I'm saying. I appeal to the World Bank to stop doing that kind of stuff. What has happened is we've done a study, not one study, and what we have done is we've already planted 5 million natural assets, but not of one kind. We did a study of Nameri Park, and we found that there are 21 species that actually keep the park going, because the element of biodiversity is more important than the element of reforesting. Most people that are giving money for reforesting at a government level, bilateral level, and a multilateral level are actually financing forests for commerce, like they're saying plant a teak forest and whatever grows on top of it. But actually, we are not saying that. We are saying replant a biodiverse forest. So what we have done is, out of the 5 million plants, we have created from a nursery value chain to the forest to recreate the old forest. The community then says 7% of that forest actually that we have done in our sample case, right or wrong, is actually bamboo. They then have a bamboo life cycle. The bamboo life cycle, one bamboo gets 5 bamboo clumps in 3 years, and 5 bamboo clumps give another 5. So that's the multiplier. And if you do a discounted cash flow over 10 years, this is the number of bamboos that will happen. Therefore, we're saying you finance that and we will take it out. So there's a quasi-commercial element to it. What is happening is people like yourselves who lead the world of finance actually are not understanding that to create biodiverse forests is more important for exactly the balance of the world. Carbon is not the only thing. Meaning people are talking about net zero. This is crazy. What about oxygen? What about making water? What about ground? What about soil? And the problem is that the tea industry, which in 1835 started in Assam, has actually ruined the bio. They cut the forest and put tea industry. Now you can say tea industry has a value which you all ourselves directly or indirectly involved in: tea, coffee, rubber, etc., and the other stuff that you do. My question is that we need to actually open up and work and debate with people like you to give you these ideas which we have put on the ground and shown you some of the downstream benefits of carbon plus. So that's really my thing. So we are not talking, I understand your point on carbon, because obviously that is quite straight, and you do this is a carbon sink, you do a calculation. But no, and the market's not good, $24, forget it, it may be 50, 100. I'm not talking about a quantum. I'm talking about the process of understanding what is restoration and how do we actually use people who have the power of influence, like yourself, Pat, to actually open up the debate and give us an opportunity to present a case study to show you what exactly can be done and will be done. Sorry about the long-winded retort.
Yeah, no, so I think, the World Bank actually, interestingly enough, so what you're talking about is more on the adaptation/resilience side. And the World Bank does their mitigation out of their total climate work, 53% is adaptation and resilience. So they are doing that. Now, the challenge is how do you give that commercial value? Because what I keep saying is, how do we get the private sector in there? The private capital will flow into that when you can demonstrate that there is a value to that. And that's where you need a methodology which has to be tested. So I don't think we are disagreeing with you. But coming back to what you said at the end, I think we would love to hear more from you at the bank and at IFC to see how this can be done. Because we are looking for ideas. We are certainly not, we may be the world's bankers. Sometimes I like to joke, but that doesn't mean we are the only people who know things. At the end of the day, what we do is we cater to what our clients want, which is the private sector in the case of IFC and the governments in the case of the bank. So we would love to hear more from you and have this debate going and take it forward. But I don't even think it's a debate. I don't think anyone's disagreeing with what you're saying. The question is, so we've identified where we want to get. Now the question is, how do we get to that goal? And there could be three parts leading there. And that's really where I think there will be debate.
No,
and
I
see, I just want to say something, Rajiv, there, that the space is moving so fast. 5 years ago, I understand at COP, the debate was all amongst the public sector. This time at COP, the private sector was present at such a level which you've never seen before. So the space is moving fast. And I think we will see a lot more activity in this space sooner than what most people think. So I would not only be optimistic, but I'm very optimistic that this will happen. And we will make mistakes as we go along. I don't think we're going to get a perfect solution or a perfect methodology from day one. But it's about experimenting, and that's exactly what our job is.
No, that is true. That's very well said, Pat. Vivek, is that actually that leads us on to the next thing, which we're saying government actually has to create policy conducive for investments. And we are not thinking linear. We believe that actually the private sector is the community and rural areas. So we are saying rural communities must be the ownership of this new model. And the new model, the value addition may be the private sector or sector which actually can do more private delivery along with the government. So I think because commons and lands are owned by the government mostly across the world, meaning it's only given for the time being. That commons and lands in rural areas where there are no urban areas, you cannot talk about New York versus Balipara and Assam, is that you basically have that with indigenous people. So our focus has been community development for rewilding, for value creation by value addition. And we've told the government, and I've had a very good interview, which I'll send with Amitabh Khan, saying that why doesn't Prime Minister Modi every year present what is called the ecological budget and value of the country, which is land, energy, wastewater, air. And then the finance minister talks about their budget, then the health minister talks about their budget and divide it up into 5-6 different places. This old method of post-Bretton Woods of having actually a financial budget and aggregate for that is actually not of any more use. Because if you don't have the ecological budget, the depletion or the addition to it, the value addition is not there. So it has to start at that apex level. And again, World Bank can play a very important role because we followed, meaning post the reconstruction of the world. Not good has happened. I mean, there are challenges and there are things which wouldn't go right, maybe very badly also. But I think through that, we've come out of it, and whether it's big dams or whether it's big projects of cities or whether it's big water projects, we've had our share of scandals, all contributed by local countries in addition to what has been what I would call missight or oversight by the donor agencies, So I think what you say is correct, and we are very happy to sort of work with you. But I think we need government to have that ecological budget. So and we are actually working with John Kerry. And therefore, what we thought the most damaged country for ecologically in terms of the highest population is Bangladesh. So next year, we are wanting to have the Eastern Himalayan NATURENOMICS Forum there. But the forum itself is not good. We're having a build-up to the forum to say what are the things that we need to do, this water management, the flooding, the entire mangrove system, which is actually, if it doesn't exist, it will destroy the world. We need people like you to come forth and make those papers for debate and actually also give examples of actions that have already taken place, which you can learn. So I think that's really the direction. So ecological budget, ecological valuation, and ecological deployment of resources. You know, people use the words mitigation and adaptation, but actually you will need $62 trillion just by going by what it is. Forget dismantling the coal industry, which is just on energy, but all the rest of the stuff is actually that much more expensive, which is ill affordable only by the World Bank or only by a country. You know, it has to have different mechanisms, but that's hope. And therefore there's great opportunity for everybody. So.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And obviously, Ranjit, we need people like you to help or to lead the way to make it happen. Again, this is, like I said, it has to be, thought leaders like you. It has to be governments who can then have a sort of a platform and make these, I don't want to use the word bankable deals, but at the end of the day, we have to be able to attract private capital. Government doesn't have the capital to do it today. Most governments are pretty high up on debt because of the pandemic. And that's what I think, that's where we come in, is how can we work with people like you and the government to make these deals bankable, to attract private capital. And obviously our role is to come in at IFC, is to be in the forefront, to lead the way. And, we would love to continue this conversation with you in the lead up to your event in Dhaka and see how we can partner with you all to make some of this happen.
No, absolutely. We'll be very privileged to make this presentation to a larger audience. This was just a small snippet of a conversation we can carry on for days. We have been over the years talking about various subjects, but finally we've got something we can retire with, both of us, and do something which is as good as what we've done in the past, which was learning all the things not to do. So we look forward, Pat, to your support and your direction and all the kindness that you always sort of give out here. Thank you so much, Pat.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
World Bank and you. Cheers.
Okay.